Good morning or afternoon or evening, whichever it may be for you. I'm Ann Brazo, CEO and founder of MPN Advocacy and Education International. With me today is our president, Natalie Giacondo, who is going to be speaking to you and giving you some ideas and ways in which to handle the very large task of being a caregiver. Having been a caregiver for many years, I can tell you that it can be extremely stressful, and adds a lot of dimensions to an already busy life. I can also tell you that my father had a chronic illness, and of course, MPNs are chronic, so it's not something that goes away in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. It's something that is lifelong, and so dealing with the ups and downs of care can be very challenging. We do a lot of programs for MPN patients, and I'm sure many of you join us for those. But this is specifically for caregivers, and we will be doing a series of these programs, probably 3 a year, maybe more. But at our in-person events, we're now going to reinstate. We used to do this where we had a breakout session for caregivers, and we will begin to do that again as well this year. So I'm going to turn this over to Natalie. If you have questions, you can send those, and I will get to them as soon as possible and ask Natalie those questions. And so I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be able to do this today. I have a lot of information to share, and I hope that there's something here for everybody. I know that everybody's at a different stage in their caregiving experience, and that while there are a lot of things that are similar about caregiving, there are a lot of differences. People have unique sets of challenges and strengths, and so everyone is going to have a different experience. I was overwhelmed by the response that we got for this caregiver support group, and had hoped that it could be a little bit more interactive, but with the amount of people that are participating today, it just wasn't possible to have one of those more intimate conversations. I guess what I want people to know is that even though you can't see them, you are in good company. You are not alone. I know that isolation is a feeling that caregivers, especially with these sort of chronic illnesses, isolation can be a real issue. And even though you can't see them, there are about 50 other people here with you today. So hopefully you can remember that throughout our time together. I'm going to share my screen here and give you some information about, one second, always a technology issue with me. Here we go. Okay. So I want to begin today by having you check in with how you feel. Something that gets missed in a lot of our lives is taking a moment to really check in and assess where you are. I'm going to take a few extra minutes here, actually, and I'm going to read a series of statements to help you to situate yourself in your caregiving experience. These statements are going to give you more information about how you experience caregiving, what you feel your capacity is for caregiving, your strengths and your weaknesses. And I'll say these comments, these statements, and you in your mind just sort of make a mental note of if you strongly agree with the statement, you tend to agree, you're kind of neutral about this, you disagree, or you strongly disagree. And again, the more information you have about yourself as a caregiver, the more empowered you are to be able to find ways to support yourself so you can continue to work at your best. So let's begin. I am comfortable being a caregiver. I know where to find help with problems related to my caregiving. I'm able to solve problems related to my caregiving. I find my caregiving to be rewarding. I am not well prepared for my caregiving duties. I know how to get other people to help me with my caregiving. I am familiar with programs and resources to help me with my caregiving. I am burned out as a caregiver. I know where to get information about the problems my family has with caregiving. People appreciate my caregiving. Caregiving is hard for me. I know how to take care of myself as I care for others. I am comfortable talking with others about my caregiving. I work as part of a team with other caregivers. I communicate well with my care partner. I am cooperative when giving care. I feel isolated or alone in my caregiving. I get adequate exercise and maintain my personal health. I maintain regular and healthy eating habits. I get adequate and uninterrupted sleep. And these are really important. So listen to these last ones and see where you're at with this. I have had a medical checkup in the last 18 months. I take periodic me time breaks. I am angry in general. I have frequent feelings of guilt. I often feel down in the dumps or blue. I feel guilty about spending time or money on myself. I am generally in good health. I am confident in my caregiving abilities. So I'm going to encourage you to continue to check in with yourself daily if possible. And I have this as a handout, so I can send this after our webinar here today. And you can use this as a check-in through the week or every month, just to gauge where you're at. This way you have the resources that you need, the information you need about yourself to be able to figure out which areas of life you need a little extra support in. So there are many types of caregivers, but most of our MPN community falls in these two categories of family caregiver, which is like a life partner or a spouse, your parents, your children. It can be neighbors, also volunteers, or a dual caregiver. And that's someone who works in the capacity of a professional caregiver, like a physician, a first responder, nurses. Do we have any dual caregivers with us here today? Is there a way for us to get any information about that and sort of the breakdown of caregivers that we have?
I think we can do that, yes.
Okay, just to get an idea, I'll keep going, but if we can have people chime in, if they're family caregivers, dual caregivers, or if they fall into a different category, because there are different resources available for each of these. So there are a variety of health situations that create the need for care. And while most of us are here because our care partner has an MPN, many people have a physical illness or disability before getting their MPN diagnosis. And this is something that's overlooked. Also, people who have an MPN diagnosis are not precluded from things like mental illness, anxiety, depression. People have developmental disabilities and an MPN. And of course, there are addictive diseases. So you could be caring for someone in more than one capacity, and perhaps you started caring for them before they were diagnosed with an MPN. And this gets overlooked. Oh, did you have
I
a
just
question?
wanted to interject that the
Sure.
people with us today are welcome to raise their hands with questions.
Yes,
That would be
please.
great, and or send them in.
Absolutely. And we'd love to be as interactive as we can in this format. So please send in your questions or comments. If you have something to add, I would love to know more about that, and the group would benefit from it as well. So there are trends that are affecting caregiving, and these things are likely affecting your caregiving experience with or without your knowledge. So at the moment, individuals in the United States are living longer than they ever have. There have been medical breakthroughs that take short-term terminal illnesses and turn them into long-term chronic illnesses. And those two variables have put a strain on the medical system. So the population of people who require care is greater than it used to be. And therefore, more care is being done at home. So a lot of caregivers are now responsible for things that doctors and nurses used to do, either in the hospital or in outpatient settings. And also something else that contributes is this changing family dynamics. As we know, families have gotten smaller, so there are less people in a family to care for all the individuals that might need help. And all of this puts additional strain on one or more caregivers. Did you have any comments about that? I thought I saw you looking at something here.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Because I was in a large family and but people lived in all these different locations geographically.
Right.
So the burden of, and I hate to use the word burden, but the major responsibilities for caregiving were dependent on myself and my sister because geographically we lived closer.
Correct. That's a great point. So that's part of that changing family dynamics. Families don't live close together. They're smaller than they used to be, and just the changes in population. So, as I mentioned, caregiving is being done more in home settings. But as you know, as a caregiver, you often find yourself maybe setting up in a hospital or going to outpatient facilities while your care partner is receiving treatment. This is something else I really wanted to know if we had any long distance caregivers here, because Anne, as you mentioned, in your big family, you and your sister were caring for your mom, and you had these people all over the country who were trying to also participate in caring and care management. And so it's important to know if we have long distance caregivers, because again, there's some different sets of resources that I could share about that.
The other thing I would add to that is because MPN patients can go many, many months and sometimes years
Yes.
with their disease being managed extremely well. And so their care is minimal, and sometimes they get right back into a regular routine. They stay at their jobs, they do whatever life throws them.
Sure.
But it's when those peak times or when there are times when something does happen. And I think the caregivers that we've known and talked to, go through a lot of anxiety about progression or about their spouse or child or loved one, going through some adverse changes with their MPN. So that anxiety may be hovering there for the caregiver for quite some time, never
Sure.
knowing when that might happen.
I see. So it's an ebb and flow is what you're saying. It can be a lot of caregiving at one time and maybe minimal caregiving at others. So that speaks to this point, which is, and again, these are all questions for you to get more information about yourself and your caregiving responsibilities, because a lot of times we overlook even thinking about what we're doing as a caregiver. How much time are we spending? When are we doing it? How are we doing it? What's impacting us being able to do it? So it's important to slow down and take a second to evaluate these things so that you can prevent some negative impact on yourself later, some negative consequences for yourself later. So how much time is spent caregiving? Sometimes we have people who are living with their care partner. So that kind of care is round the clock. And while it might not be, I'm taking someone out of their bed and putting them in a wheelchair, in our case, it could be my partner is too tired to do housework anymore or to participate in the kids' lives as they used to, and this can, as you mentioned, ebb and flow. But it's a good idea to kind of take a look at how much caregiving you're doing throughout throughout the day? How much has been impacted by this partner's illness? How do people become caregivers? This seems like an obvious question, but it really is something that you should think about. Most people fall into the position because it's sort of default or a non-question. If your parents are sick, then you take care of them. If your child is ill, then you take care of them. In some situations, though, there is a conscious choice that's made because, like you said, Anne, about your family, geographically, you and your sister were the closest. So that was part of the decision making. Sometimes it's a conscious decision like that. Often it's not. So, and of course, what do caregivers do or what do they not do? And I'm going to put some common ideas here on the board, but if someone has some others that we're not addressing, it's really great to sort of share those so other people can hear what your caregiving experience is. I'd love to see a show of hands. Of course I can't, but how many people are providing emotional support for their care partner? They're listening, they're providing companionship, the physical care, which sometimes might just be helping your partner do their injectable, but it can cover a lot of ground, right? You're advocating for your partner, maybe during doctor's appointments, or you're getting information from advocacy groups like ours. Home management, financial assistance, transportation, gatekeeping. You know, your partner's too tired. They don't want to have conversations with their doctor or their family. So you're the person who does that and brokers their relationships. Now, of course, I can't see anything here, but are there things here that we haven't addressed? Are there some other things that you do as caregivers that you never thought you would be doing, but now come to find out this is an important thing that you've taken on? And I'll keep going unless someone comments. So all of this responsibility and all of these different roles sort of turn into this amalgamation of big feelings, this big ball of feelings, both positive and negative. And here are some of the feelings that we found caregivers report feeling. Sometimes it's fear, fatigue, and you mentioned anxiety. There can be anger, feelings of being trapped or confined, feelings of disappointment. But then also people have reported feeling extremely rewarded by their caregiving experience. They feel a sense of deeper intimacy with their care partner. So you can take a look here, and if anybody has any feelings that they could add. Again, this is going to be amazing to talk about in some of our in-person breakout sessions, because I think it really lends itself to conversation.
Does, and I can only speak from my own experience.
Yeah.
But also as an advocate for MPN patients, we've lost a lot of people. I've been in this space for 20 years, and I can tell you I've lost some good friends who progressed in later life and had other issues. But as an advocate, it's very important that we keep ourselves healthy and emotionally not unattached, but in a place that is there for the families, when there is an issue, when there is progression. But as a caregiver to other folks in my world, that slide shows every emotion. I mean, that goes like this, you can have a good day and you can have a bad day. And we know our patients have good days and have bad days. And when you mentioned the financial situation,
right,
that is a huge issue. And it can be. Not everybody is in a position to have the best physician, to have the best treatment options available to them. And it can be extremely, there's a huge issue about the financial part. And some of our patients have lost their jobs because of their symptoms.
I was going to say, Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, it's just an added
Uh,
problem, not only for the caregiver, but for the patient.
yeah.
And, and so there's so many things. And I'm glad you mentioned our in-person breakout sessions, because we will have an opportunity, and in subsequent webinars, we'll make sure that people are allowed to, like, at least show up if they'd like to, but
Sure.
have a more interactive. But I like what you're doing here. Thank you.
That's good. Yeah, thanks for that information. And actually finances comes up a little later, so I'm really glad that you made a point to say something about that. Um, it's good to know that our feelings stem from our thoughts and belief systems and attitudes. And so some common concerns about caregiving sort of fuel some of the feelings that caregivers report having. So, for example, feelings of being completely consumed by the caregiving responsibilities or by your care partner's diagnosis, financial worries, as you mentioned, like, for example, I saw a lot of things about people who, as you said, lost their jobs, retired early to be able to take on care responsibilities, or had to go back to work because they needed medical insurance to be able to cover their costs of their care partner's illness. Or the main breadwinner of the family fell ill and it just sent shockwaves through their finances. And of course, so those feelings we saw before about anxiety, fear, feeling trapped, those things are being driven by these underlying beliefs and thoughts. Also, the idea of conflicting roles. If I'm with my spouse and he and I are supposed to be equals, but he has some issues where I now have to take care of him, that affects our love relationship. And there are other examples of that kind of conflicting roles that put pressure on caregivers and their care partners. There's also this stigma of illness. In Western cultures, primarily, the way that we do treatment is the doctor diagnoses you, they treat you, and then you get better, you recover. And so their job is to diagnose and treat, and your job is to get better. And if you don't, then something is wrong with you. I mean, that's sort of like an underlying message. It's your fault if you're sick. So that's something that, is running underneath people's feelings. Also, the feeling that you have, or the thought that you have limited prospects for your future. Things have now been restricted. You don't know what the future holds. It was wide open, and now maybe you're feeling more restricted. Will you get access to the appropriate care? Will you get access to one of these MPN specialists? Do your doctors have the information that you need to make good choices? How are you going to get that information? Where are you going to find help? All of these things contribute to that big ball of feelings. And ultimately, we have to start with ourselves. So all of that can be going on, all of these demands and feelings and thoughts. And where do we begin? How are we going to address something that really impacts every single area of our life? And the place to begin is with ourselves. And this is I can't tell you how many times someone has told me this. In fact, and I think you've told me this, that you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on the person that you're responsible for. And that is so much easier said than done. I'm sure any of us who takes care of other people understands that. But I would like to do another little exercise, and if it's at all possible, to just grab a writing utensil and a piece of paper, and you could even do this maybe right there yourself, because we all have responsibilities and we're busy, but specifically for caregivers, this is really useful. Again, this is something that I can send out, but you're going to want to keep track of your score because we're going to use it in just a second. So, all right, how well do you take care of yourself? And you're going to score yourself. So I'll say one of these statements and you're going to give yourself a number. 1 means almost always, 2, frequently, 3, occasionally, 4, rarely, and 5, never. So here we go. I exercise on a regular basis. So give yourself a score there. I make and keep preventative and necessary medical and dental appointments. Give yourself a score. I have a job or regular volunteer activity that is gratifying to me. And Anne, you better give yourself a high score for that since you're okay. I am free of tobacco use. I am free of the abuse of drugs or alcohol. I get an adequate amount of sleep every night. I have a hobby or recreational activity that I enjoy and spend doing. I eat at least 2 or 3 balanced meals a day. I have at least one person in whom I can confide, tell all my problems and successes to. I take time to do things that are important to me. This could be like going to church, spending time alone, gardening. I have an easy time sleeping at night. I have personal goals and am taking steps to achieve them. Okay, so go ahead and total up your score and let's see how you did. Here's our scoring. Excuse me. Okay. If you got 12 to 15, you're doing an excellent job taking care of yourself. 25 to 36, there's some room for improvement there. This is kind of where it gets important. This was research that was done, so these scores correlate with people's health outcomes. So from 37 to 48, those points, it's a high risk for your own personal health problem. And then 48 to 60, you're at extremely high risk for your own personal health problem. And this is important because if you are a primary caregiver, it's not only important to you and your own well-being, but you're in a position of responsibility for other people. So you have to take care of yourself first in order to continue to take care of other people. The whole idea is to prevent caregiver burnout. And I actually think this word is a little bit loaded because it puts everything in terms of just being a caregiver. And really, we're all individual people who participate in caregiving. But really, this is to prevent you from getting sick. So it's called caregiver burnout. But here's some things you can do to prevent this. Identify your unmet needs. Create a coping skills toolbox. I have some coping skills coming up, but I would love to talk more about this with anybody who's willing to listen to me because I've got quite a few coping skills all ready to go for anybody who would like to talk more about this. Maybe offline, you can email me, you can send in questions here, or again, join us for one of our other webinars or breakout session in our live events. Find outside help for major difficulties impacting your situation. You can do a lot of things, but you can't do everything and you can't be everything to all people. So you have to figure out how you're going to identify those things you can't do yourself and where can you go for help. Identify common hooks that others may use to get you on the defensive or engage. A lot of times when you're in a caregiving situation, there's a setup for this relationship where you feel obligated to do certain things, or you might have these ideas about your own what you should be doing or you shouldn't be doing, and those things really can hook us and cause our some negative spiraling. So I was saying again about the coping skills toolbox. So resilience is one of the primary coping skills for caregivers. And this is not a book that is primarily for caregivers, but this is a really great book that discusses resilience and helps you to cultivate resilience. This is not, the MPN is not endorsing this book or anything. This is just my own personal resource. It's called Grit by Angela Duckworth. So if you get a chance and you want to learn more about resilience, this is a good place to start. So the way that we foster resilience is by making connections, which is great because all of you have done that today by coming to this webinar. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. Accept change as part of living, right? Things change even when we don't want them to. So whatever situation you're in right now, or whenever you're in a place where you're feeling particularly low, it will change. All things change. Start moving toward your goals. Take decisive actions. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. Nurture positive views of yourself. And that can be particularly hard for caregivers who sometimes feel like they're inadequate in the roles or responsibilities that they are being asked to take on. I saw a lot about this negative self-view. Keep things in perspective and maintain a hopeful outlook. Some of these seem like sort of superficial adages, but there are skills that go with each of these resilience skills, and you can find them in this book, and we can also talk about them in more detail. Did you have?
I wanted to talk about when I look at this list,
Yes.
and as a caregiver, I would
Yes.
have to say making connections is the number one thing, because I just and that's for me. Not
Sure.
everybody is a communicator. Not everybody wants to be around a bunch of people.
Right.
When you talked about isolation, that was the biggest thing I experienced, because I could no longer see friends. I was working full time and caregiving full time. And
Wow.
there are statistics that show that very often primary caregivers are working full time and caregiving full time. And it may not be extensive caregiving, like you're doing everything for this person, but it was extremely valuable to have connections, to have friends I could talk to have physicians and counselors that were available, advocacy groups. It was just very, very important. So I see that almost as, I'm glad it's number one, because it was definitely number one for me.
I agree with you. And that's why I was so happy that you were doing this caregiver support group and that you're going to continue to do these. I think it's really valuable, especially once we get to that, interaction between caregivers with each other. So as I mentioned before, there are some hooks, that we sort of are haunted by. Either our care partner might say these things, even relatives, other people, well-intentioned people who want us to do something, and maybe we're trying to set a boundary and we can't do that because we're hooked. We also have this thing about, I was going to just share one little story about should. I had a really great relationship with a therapist who told me, don't should all over yourself. You have these ideas about the way things are supposed to go and what you're supposed to do. And actually that therapist was an MPN patient himself. And he spoke and presented, I think, on mindfulness at one of your live MPN events. And unfortunately, he passed away, but he had so many great, he had so much to offer in terms of his insight about his illness and the way that he dealt with that. So maybe we can find a clip of that and share it again at some point. But anyway, so people can use these. They don't necessarily know that they're using them. So I don't want you to think that people are consciously manipulating. Sometimes they do, but often they don't know. And they're looking for a way to engage or get their needs met. But this is sometimes what the result of that is. So it's good to identify what your hooks are. These are some examples, but you probably are pretty aware of what gets you to do something or what feels icky to you, or it just feels like you're being roped into something that you don't really want to do. And it's important as a caregiver to be aware of these because it will help you to set healthy boundaries for yourself. So obviously guilt and shame, if you cared, you would come over right now and spend some time with me. I don't have to go through all of these, but do you see any, Anne, do you see any specifically that you'd like me to take some time on, or anything look familiar to you?
I think the biggest one would be, you don't know what I'm going through.
Right.
And, I also want to mention that we have parents of
Right.
children with an MPN, and we just got a thumbs up on that one. Because I think that's what a lot of caregivers go through. You don't know what I'm going through. And, we have parents that have young children with an MPN, and the stress on those parents, I love them all. They're fantastic people. And boy, I'll tell you, they had to learn to be advocates really fast, very quickly.
And I
And
would imagine, if I can just jump in, I would imagine that being a parent of a chronically ill child, it must be really difficult to set those parenting boundaries, or to, I can't imagine what that must be like.
well, and with an MPN, every time they get on the bus, if somebody hits them, if they get
Right.
injured in a way that could be dangerous. So there's a multitude of things, but I would say, um, you don't know what I'm going through is probably a big one for what I experienced.
Okay. And of course, I just want to just clarify that these are, it sounds like what you're saying is that you felt like you weren't understood, that other people didn't know what you were going through. And I think that that's valid. These are hooks that maybe someone will use to get you pulled into doing something that you don't necessarily want to do, or that you cannot do. For example, if you had to go to a meeting and your mom needed something and you had to do it later than she needed, she might say, okay, I'll manage somehow on my own, and that might be a hook for you. So you drop everything and go deal with that particular issue, just to clarify that. Okay. So these hooks, and our feelings about our role as a caregiver, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, what we're failing to do, result in negative emotions. And it's a good idea to try to find ways to alleviate negative emotions, starting with identifying that you're even experiencing them. I don't want to assume that everybody here is experiencing a bunch of negative emotions about caregiving, but here's some ways to alleviate some negative emotions if you do find yourself in that space. First of all, recognizing and acknowledging your emotions, remembering that you're human, taking responsibility for your own feelings. That's a tough one, but you're the only thing that you can control. You can't control any other person or any other circumstance, really. So you have to find a way to own your own feelings. Identifying the source of your negative emotion, sometimes that can be rather difficult, especially if there's a lot going on. You might not be able to get to the root of why you're feeling the way that you are. Express your emotions to others, which Anne, you had mentioned was so important to you in your caregiving experience. Watching for those hooks. And then this one is really important. Watching for the 3 Ps. This is a mind trick that you a lot of times when you're in a negative space can fall into, and that's personalizing something negative that's happening, like, oh, God is punishing me, or this is my karma. Thinking that it's pervasive, meaning that this negative thing is now bleeding into everything else. I'm not good as a caregiver, which means I'm not a good person, which means I'm not a good partner, which means I'm not a good mother. Like, it's not pervasive, and also permanent. If you're feeling a negative emotion right now, it doesn't mean it's going to last forever. You won't always feel this negative emotion, but when you're in a dark place, or when you're in a difficult place, our mind plays this trick that it's personal, pervasive, and permanent. So watch for that. So another thing we can do to support ourselves in our caregiving journey is to assess our social support system. And Anna is a real big advocate of this. Actually, I've heard you speak many times about making sure that your healthcare team is listening to you and is giving you what you need in terms of resources. And this goes for caregivers as well, I believe. So there is this assessment so that you can help assess your social support system. And I have it listed here. I have it also in a handout that I can give to people, but just to kind of go over it. So for example, identifying the people and organizations who help you, and hopefully MPN Advocacy would be one of those organizations. And if we're not, we hope you'll reach out to us so that we can give you the resources that we have access to. And if we don't have access to those resources, we will put you in touch with someone who does. I would, so some options for that would be, your spouse, your parents, your children, church members, professional agencies like ours and others. And then once you identify at least one person who helps you, you can figure out how you're asking for help. For example, do you have anybody who is providing help with transportation, groceries, assistance with chores? If you don't have that set up, maybe that's something that you can incorporate to take some pressure off of other areas of your life and free you up for more personal time or for more time spent with friends or in a support group like this one.
I would strongly recommend that. I'm just
You
saying,
would.
yes.
Yeah.
I had a friend a social worker who just happened to be a social worker that said,
Yes.
let me sit with your mom for 2 hours.
Right.
And just having those 2 hours, because you do have these feelings of resentment, not toward that person necessarily, but toward the situation. And
Right.
just getting away for a few hours, I would strongly recommend. We had a caregiver that wrote a piece for our newsletter once who said, when somebody offers to come and clean, let them,
Right.
just let
Right
them
on.
do some of the things, or if someone says, let me take this person for the weekend, or let
Right.
me do this. I know it's hard because when we're caregivers, we almost become control freaks too.
Right.
I knew exactly what my mother needed. I knew exactly when she needed it. I mean, we were very regimented in her therapeutic care and so on.
Right.
And we were always afraid to leave her. And
Right.
so, letting someone else know exactly what, let's say, for example, the child, or, this is, again, is when things are not so great with your partner that you're caring for, and where you need a little extra help. But
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Have you identified someone who provides resources and information for you about MPNs? Have you identified someone who provides emotional or psychological assistance for you when you need it? What about someone who's just your cheerleader? Don't you love those people who, no matter what, they think you're great, they're on your side, you could never do anything wrong. We need people in our life like that. And this is a really good question. What are some of the practical reasons you have for not using relatives, friends, or neighbors for social support? And what are some reasons they might have for not providing support? And you just spoke about that, that sometimes you have these ideas of how things need to go. And if they don't go that way, there could be implications. So there's a bit of control there maybe for some people, but there's lots of reasons. And it's a good idea, again, to understand yourself as a caregiver and what your capacity is, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, so that you can find the support that you need. Or it's okay sometimes to say, I need help and I don't even know what I need help with. I'm not even sure anymore, but here's what's going on and can you help me? And I know Ann takes calls like that often. So feel free to call us if you're in that position. What are some beliefs and attitudes others may have that prevent them from offering support to you? And I have been in this situation before. In fact, I'm kind of in this situation right now where I have a friend who's very, very sick and it's not looking great for her. And her partner is doing the best that she can to help to take care of her. And I'm afraid to bother them. They've got a lot going on. I'm afraid to ask questions. I'm afraid I'm going to upset them if I ask them how she's doing, or if I ask any, it's delicate. And so this question, what are some beliefs others might have that prevent them from offering help? Sometimes people don't offer help because they're afraid, or they don't know how to help, and then there comes this distance. Here you feel isolated again because nobody's even asking if they can help you. Anyway, okay, what are some beliefs and attitudes that you have that may prevent you from accepting help or seeking support from other people? And that's a really good question. And then this is the good part. What steps could you take to cope with those barriers? So the idea of identifying and understanding ourselves as caregivers and some of the struggles that we have is so that we can do something about it. So again, this is something that I can send out to anybody who wants it, or maybe I'll just send it to everybody who's joined the webinar today. And lastly, and I thought this was cute, but cultivate humor and laughter. So sometimes this just comes up anyway, because you can't help if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry sometimes. And so, but this says, sat in the waiting room for 3 hours. Doctors tell me to make time for myself, which is exactly what I think when I'm doing this caregiver presentation of all this information. And really, you have a list this long already. And what am I telling you? You got to do a bunch of other stuff. But but I think this idea of cultivating humor and laughter, it eases tension. It supports a perk in our immune system. Laughter is a really good therapeutic tool. And we can cultivate this by collecting funny jokes and emails. We can watch funny movies, and it's a conscious decision. Instead of turning on the news, maybe you turn on a stand-up comedian. And I know that sounds cheesy, but this stuff works. So cultivate humor and laughter. And I wish I was a funnier person. I'd tell a joke, but I'm really not that funny. So I'm more of the serious type, but all right. So here's some of the resources that I used to put this information together. I have more resources available for people who need more information. I'm also available, as some of you know, I have a degree in psychology and also yoga and meditation. So through MPN Advocacy, I'm available to talk or to share some tools. Also, you can go to the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. Caregiver Action Network is wonderful. They have all kinds of printable lists and documents that help you to organize your house, your medical records. It's just a really nice website. Of course, AARP, and then you can get more information at our website under our resource section. So that's kind of where it's at. I don't know how collaborative or how communicative we can be now, but
I think what we'll do is, get some information from the folks that attended today.
sure.
And again, we will be in Grand Rapids, Michigan, April 25th, and we will have a breakout session for caregivers at that event, for those of you that can attend. And Natalie said she's available. You can send her an email and ask questions that way if you'd like. And just know that we're here if you need us. It's a tough job. And it's a particularly tough job when it's chronic. As I said, my mother was the main caregiver to my father, but it affected the entire family for years. And so I get it. And perhaps that's why I'm where I am and have been here for so long. But anyway, we're here. Let us know if you need us. Take good care of yourselves today. And we hope to see you soon. And thank you, Natalie. That was really well done.
Thanks. I hope that everybody got a little something that they needed today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Yeah.